here in Austin, Texas, for this incredible panel here with this incredibly esteemed filmmakers beside me. Sitting directly to my left, we have Drew Van Steenbergen, right? Steenbergen. I'm always wondering about those. About the pronunciations there. Who is a Webby-nominated editor for a project called Brooklyn Sound. He has over a dozen film and TV credits, including over 50 episodes of Good Hang with Amy Poehler, if anybody's heard of that. Sitting to his left is the cinematographer of Basic, who is Veronica Bouza, Veronica Bouza, who also shot The Gutter, starring Shamik Moore, Paul Reiser, and Julianne Moore. Directly to Veronica's left. Yeah, please give it up for them, please. Yeah. Sitting here is Freya Berkhout.
That sounds so much better, but it's Berkhout.
Berkhout. Oh, but lovely to have you anyway. Who is the composer of The Ascent, a documentary here at South by. Her prior credits include Tribeca Film Festival project called Ride or Die, starring Brianna Middleton, and Trapped, which also won the special jury prize at South by Southwest in 2024. So this is Freya. And all the way here on the far side, we have Patrick Lawrence, editor of Ugly Cry and Joybubbles. He is a 25x feature film editor, right? With over 25 feature films. The good version of that. Let's just go with the good version of that phrasing. He has also had 8 films at Sundance, including, and Shelby Oaks was also there, which just came out from Neon Rated. So congratulations, Patrick. So to kick it off here today at the Behind the Camera House, let's start down here at the side and let's talk about Basic. What is the film Basic about?
Oh, I thought you were going to go first.
This is to either Drew or Veronica.
So
who's the best pitch man?
Well, I was like, I'll start, and then I really hope you come in.
We're going to tag team it.
Halfway in. I think Basic, it kind of dives into our insecurities. It's a rom-com, and our protagonist, Gloria, is going through her exes, or her boyfriend's exes, and discovers someone who's pretty basic.
Yeah, the movie starts with them breaking up, and it's like her spiraling down, thinking that this ex is gonna take him back and like steal like her perfect life from her. And so she starts like, stalking her in a very chill, modern dating way.
Everything.
How do you stalk in a chill way?
Right now, I've done it many times. Instagram.
And have you guys premiered? Is it when does it?
On Monday night.
On Monday night.
Yeah.
Great. And so the film is pretty. It's more of a drama. It's more of an action. It's a comedy. Where do we land on the spectrum for your film?
I would say it's more of a comedy, but maybe more of a rom-com. But it weeds the thread.
Right. And Freya, can you tell me a little bit about The Ascent? It's a documentary with a pretty interesting protagonist.
Yeah, it's a crazy story. So it's a film about Mandy Horvath, who is a double amputee who climbed Mount Kilimanjaro on her hands. And it's also it's kind of like a hero film, but it's also a true crime story about the circumstances under which she lost her legs when she was 21, which I'm not going to give away here because you guys should see the film. But it sort of weaves this beautiful way between the climb and finding out what happened to her and the sort of trauma that she's been through and why she's going through this crazy physical experience to sort of deal with that trauma. So yeah, it's a really beautiful film. And
it's pretty brutal too. I've only seen a little bit of clips, but there's scenes of her hands, even though she's gloved, like cut, and she's soaking them. And tell me, like, how did you translate sort of that journey, that climb, into a soundscape for that movie?
Such a good question. So my process on this has been really interesting because I didn't score the whole film. Adam Peters is the composer, but I was doing additional music, and it's existing music that I wrote for a feature film about 6 years ago, a magic realist film, queer magic realist film, and so it's being recontextualized in this story. But yeah, Mandy, like the process of her climbing, you're not meant to walk on your hands. Yeah, the terrain is just wild. Like seeing these footage of her with these crazy blisters and like needing to treat it so she doesn't get any kind of infection, because of course if that happens then like the climb is over. So it's a pretty intense story of just the resilience of the human spirit, honestly. Like she's incredible, and I haven't met her yet, but I'm going to meet her tomorrow, so I'm very excited for that. Yep.
And have you premiered? When's your screening?
Tomorrow at 11 a.m. at the
Tomorrow at
Zach.
11. Everybody write that down.
And we're playing 2 more times, which you can look at on the schedule, but yeah.
Great. Congratulations. Patrick, tell me about, let's start. So Patrick has both Ugly Cry and Joybubbles. I've seen a lot about Joybubbles, and I'm very intrigued about it. But let's start with Ugly Cry. Tell me about what Ugly Cry is.
Ugly Cry is a dark comedy thriller directed by Emily Robinson, who's also an actress and writer. And it's very much based on her own personal experiences as a young actress in Hollywood. And it centers on an actress who becomes obsessed with her own body after being told in an audition that she has an ugly cry.
And it sort of spirals from there.
Yeah, it gets very substance adjacent. Let's just put it like that.
What sort of paths does she go to correct her ugly cry to make a pretty...
She dives pretty heavily into Botox, which then leads to an obsession into self-Botoxing, which I can't imagine is a good thing. And also just completely changing her appearance. And there's also elements involved like her best friend who's constantly going after the same jobs as her. So there's a lot of competition there, and her actor boyfriend who may or may not be cheating on her with another actress.
Oh, so that probably plays into the... Yeah. Tell me about Joybubbles. What is Joybubbles? It's a documentary with also a pretty interesting protagonist.
Yeah, Joybubbles was based on the life of Joe Ingressia, who had a special talent which was perfect pitch. And during the 60s, when long-distance telephone calls were very expensive, Joe could whistle into the telephone and hack the Bell telephone system. And he became one of the first technology hackers in existence. And this revolution created this group called the Phone Freaks. And part of the Phone Freaks were Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and they created a device called a blue box that you could hold up to the telephone receiver, and it would make the dial tones that the telephone system could use. And that's how you were able to hack the phone system. So the way I like to summarize it is that, Joybubbles influenced the Phone Freaks, who influenced Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who created Apple, who created the iPhone. And we now have a device that connects the entire world, and it all stems from Joe's obsession with the telephone. But he eventually grew up and grew out of hacking and became kind of a Mr. Rogers type and redefined himself as Joybubbles and created hotlines that you could call into and keep company. I forgot to mention that he's blind. That's very important. I'm sorry. He's blind. He's blind. That's a very important element in the story. That he was looking for comfort in the telephone and talking to people on the telephone, and so he created these hotlines that you could call into, and he would tell you stories, and that kind of became his legacy.
Well, I mean, even whether he sees or doesn't see, that's not a...
It's an absolutely incredible story.
It's a crazy story.
Regardless.
Yeah, and he passed away before the film started, right?
Right. He passed away alone in his apartment, and the reason we know anything about it is because the news was shared and somebody at the New York Times published an obituary. This is in 2007, 2008. And because of that, our director, Rachel Morrison, had seen that obituary and decided, why is there not a documentary about this? Why is nobody telling this guy's story? And that's where her obsession started. And we didn't even start working on it until 2020, 2021. So it took her 10 years of gathering all the materials and his ephemera and his tapes and all of this stuff to really put together the story the right way.
Yeah, and he had a lot of tapes, so it's actually like told from him, right?
Yeah,
like he kind of was able to tell his story.
Yeah, in the edit, the way we crafted the story was by him telling his own story. We have people that come and we do some interviews where people can help kind of like add a little bit of depth to what was going on or how they interacted with him. But he spent most of his time doing answering machine recordings and also just walking around with a cassette tape and recording what he was doing day to day. And through that, we were able, and also seminars too. He would go to seminars and tell his story there. So we were able to piece together his entire life through those tapes.
How did you do that visually if it's a lot of audio archive?
For me, it's myself and Bradford Thomason are the editors on the movie, and because I started the project, I had to stare at a blank screen for about 2 months of just like looking at a black screen, doing a radio edit of his life. And then once we had that put together, which was about 2 hours, we were able to kind of like pare it down a little bit more. But where it became a struggle was with the Phone Freaks, because you could have a whole movie on the Phone Freaks by themselves. So what we noticed was that the further we got into them, the further we got away from Joe and his story. So we had to really kind of keep that short. And then I had to leave the project. I ended up leaving to work on Shelby Oaks, and Bradford came on, and Bradford was able to really get it down to a nice 83 minutes, and also worked on with the stock footage that we use, because we use a lot of stock footage that encompasses, sort of visualizes how Joe describes the sounds he's hearing.
I mean, same with Mandy's story. So obviously there's not footage of how she lost her legs, so it's all animation. Yep.
But also, it's interesting that both of your documentaries concern characters who have, some form of I don't know, the correct term of ability loss, disability. But it ultimately opens up some other door, or some other, there's a way to overcome it. So thinking about here with Drew and Veronica, how did you want your film to feel? Because it sounds like it's pretty funny forward. It maybe has a little bit of paranoia that sparks humor. Yeah. What were some of the early conversations when you got into the film about how to make that feel?
Well, some of the comps that Chelsea Devantez, our writer-director, had were like Fight Club, like Social Network and stuff, because like the first like 2 acts are just her basically having a really long anxiety attack. And so it's like there's trying to find humor within like paranoia, and then like the release of it kind of like back and forth. So it's a lot of it like rhythm that we kind of did. And most of the actors are like very seasoned comedians and improvisers. So it was like making sure that we had the script, but allowing them some leeway. And so a lot of it in the edit is like rhythmically being like, there should be a joke here to kind of give you a release, or this should feel crazier or more like kinetic. So a lot of it was like squeezing and releasing kind of back and forth. And that's mainly what Chelsea and I talked about as far as post.
No, I mean, to just double down on that, it was really creating a very grounded look and feel. And then in those heightened moments, you can really take it to the imagination, because it just leans so much into Gloria's subjective, or the feeling of the unknown, or it just, yeah.
How did that, what he's talking about, sort of the frenzied paranoia, how did that play into some of the, whether the camera work or some of the cinematography, how did that play into the look of the film?
To me, like, that's some of the funnest stuff, because I feel like in a rom-com, a lot of times you don't get to, move away from that very like rom-com look. And I think Chelsea really opened up to like, let's make this almost like a little horror film, especially in the beginning. So it's very much of like, we have our palette, and then how can we expand on it? How can we just dive deeper into her fears and, what she loves?
Yeah, great. So thinking about how did you like blend that? Well, let's talk about the cinematography on Basic. Like, how do you blend that comedy with the paranoia? Because if you're talking about Fight Club, and these are pretty contrasty, dark movies, lots of shadows. How does that play into the comedy components of it? Like, does it ever show its cards in the cinematography that it is a comedy?
I mean, I would say like every time I break down a movie, regardless if it's a comedy, it's a horror, it's a drama, it's still the same process. It's really understanding the story and what the characters are going through. And I lost train of thought. Saw a good friend of mine.
Hi, friend. Which friend? Hello? Hi, friend.
Yeah, and it's taking that same process and using it, regardless. So I think it's more for us kind of setting the look and knowing where we want to push the look, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it's like lean into the material.
Yeah.
Right?
So, like, a big thing for us is, like, we want to make a contemporary rom-com, but, we have, like, Fight Club. We had a lot of just really jarring references, and Chelsea's someone that will just text you an idea, like, at 2 a.m., and you're like, oh, I don't know where this goes, but I will figure it out by the time I get to set. And it's really fun to be able to kind of process and figure out, what is the best way to kind of implement different styles.
Yeah. How did you balance that in edit, the difference between the comedy and the sort of the frenetic paranoia and the obsession, or?
Yeah, there's especially with like the paranoia, like most of it is like making the internal external. And so like since everything is like more grounded like visually, it is like music, sound effects, and cutting is like what's making us like get in her head and freaking out more. And so it was knowing when to like to make it play out more like a scene. And it is like the paranoia is like in Gloria's head, and everyone else in the world is like going about their day. So it is like going from like closest to cutting to a wide, and it's just like everyone at work being like, what the is wrong with her? So it's like, I guess it's that.
It's very much of like, we are very contained through most of the movie until a little later where we really get to like let go. We get to see the world and we get to kind of expand.
So you kind of stay close to that character for a period. Yeah. How was it collaborating with Chelsea? I mean, obviously 2 a.m. text messages happen, but...
I mean, it's kind of a dream. Like, you want to I feel like when it comes to a feature, you just want to be in it 24/7. And I think the beauty with this one is we shortlisted most of the movie before we started prep. So we already had an idea of where we wanted to go with the project, and it was more, now we just got to execute, which is really nice. And we're always, trying to find other ways of like, how can we make this better?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before about this, but like the movie was very quick. Like it finished shooting like mid-October, and now we're premiering on Monday. And so like the edit process was nuts. And so our process was Chelsea living in my basement office. But what's great about Chelsea and it being a comedy too is that like you do have to kill your darlings at a certain point. Like if a joke doesn't land, if a story point doesn't land, they don't like this. But if something doesn't work, you have to like test it a bunch. So you do like screenings. We did multiple screenings. We like you saw like the first assembly one, which was like fatter and longer, and like you just kind of narrow it down. And what was great with working with Chelsea is like, and I think because our timeline was much more truncated, is that like you're just going off of gut most of it because you don't really have a lot of time to like labor over a scene or something. So it's like if one of us or if someone in a screening is like, I didn't really like that, then we would look at it the next day and be like, yeah, I think they're right. And you would have to like swap it out for another joke or kind of like find another way into the scene or see if it's even worth keeping in. Yeah.
Yeah. I forget if it was like Larry David or something. It was a very famous comedian used to say that they would, when they screen dailies, they would actually mark down like a rating on jokes. Yeah. So like that way, when they've seen the joke a dozen times, they know what their what the initial response was, so they can always kind of go back to it, particularly with improvisation.
I mean, I will say what really helped on this one, which I've never had on a movie, you guys did teaser trailers, which was a good way after like every week to like re-motivate the team and to kind of put into perspective like what we shot. So it kind of gave you a sense of like, okay, these jokes really work, and then you'll do a week where you're like, oh, there's no jokes. This is a really sad movie. So it like you're very like filtering through of like, is it okay? Is it good? I don't know.
Yeah, there would be a week of like heavy improv and then a week of like traumatic child backstory, and so you're just like cutting these sizzles and you're like, woof, okay.
Sounds like you're like pulling the strings of the emotion, like manipulating the crew motivation.
Maybe we won't show this child.
Why don't we give him a real bummer this week?
Yeah.
So Freya and Patrick, let's maybe talk Freya. Let's talk about the collaboration on your end, because you're the additional score is your credit, right? So how was it working with? It was Adam was the main composer.
Yeah. So I didn't work with Adam at all because this was existing music. So it's kind of a composer's worst nightmare. We have temp love, which I don't know if you guys know about, but temp music gets laid into the edit, and unfortunately, directors get very, very attached to it, which as a composer is really frustrating because you need to replace it, but it's never going to be exactly what the temp is. And I was on the other side of that this time. I usually work as a composer, but this one, I was the temp music, and the directors just got really attached to it, and they wanted to license the music. So yeah, it was interesting. Like, I was talking to them about it for about a year and a half. So I heard from them very early on, and then I didn't hear from them for ages, and I was like, oh, maybe this is not happening. And they've been making the film for 5 years, so, documentaries especially are a very long journey. I'm working on one at the moment that's been 9 years in the making. So, yeah, it was just like a really unorthodox way of being connected to a project. Usually you're sort of deeply in it and very sort of emotionally connected, but I only saw where my music was placed relatively recently, and it was kind of interesting for me to see this sort of ethereal piece of music that I wrote, like 6 or 7 years ago now, be placed in a film that is, on the one hand, like a really intense hero story about this woman who's literally climbing a mountain on her hands. It's quite incredible, but also the underbelly of what it looks like to be sort of dealing with trauma and why you would do that in the first place. Like, what is it that's actually going on in her body and in her mind? And that's kind of where my music came in. It's sort of like a more delicate piece of music that's looking at the vulnerability before you end up taking on something like this, and how do you sort of mentally prepare for that? So it was really unusual. This hasn't happened to me before. So I was kind of like, what an unusual way to be sort of connected with the project.
Yeah. So you weren't working off locked picture by any stretch. You were
not at all.
Were you working off any picture?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
So you were working off vibe.
I found out when I saw the film where it was. So I was like so curious to see where they placed it. I thought, based on the piece of music, which I obviously know like the back of my hand, I was sort of like, I feel like it'll be in the middle or at the end because it has this reflective nature. It's very, the film that it's from is a sort of meditation on grief and family, and so I was kind of like, well, where does this fit in this story about climbing a mountain? Like, what are we actually going to be doing with that? So to see it placed, it was like in anticipation of her climb, so it's kind of her mentally preparing for it. So that's why it's in that very vulnerable place. It's like sort of finding the quiet before the sort of taxing nature of what it looks like to climb a mountain in Tanzania.
What did you feel about where it was placed? You thought it was a perfect spot? Were
it
there
was
tracks
really nice. Yeah, she's swimming, and so it's got a very watery nature. The piece of music is very sort of reverby, and I feel like they placed it in a way that made a lot of sense. It's probably where I would have chosen to put it if I'd been sort of tasked with that thing. So yeah, I'm really happy with where it is, and it's just nice to sort of, it's a film with all men. I think the team is all men, so I think it was important to sort of bring what felt to me like a really feminine element to that. I think, there's a hardness to Mandy because of what she's been through, and I think that is really important to portray, but her softness is also a part of her journey, and I think for all of us, like, that vulnerability is really relatable, like, to see the hero on the outside, you're like, wow, she's so strong, but these moments of like, actually, this is really hard, this is a really difficult thing to undertake, and it's okay to feel unsure about where you are in that process. So yeah, it was nice to sort of bring something more delicate to the table.
So, Patrick, thinking about Joybubbles, tell me a little bit about the arc of that film. Like, how did it build as you were editing it? Because it feels like you laid out a radio cut. But like, what do you hope people take away as that journey unfolds for that character?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me was that there's still a lot of goodness in this world, and I think that as a society, we might look at somebody like Joybubbles and say, oh, there's something off about this guy. But he was just one of those rare, pure-hearted souls that just, lived a lot of his life being alone and wanted human connection, and he found that through the telephone. And it was until we did a series of pickup interviews in Minneapolis where he had one of his phone lines, and it was called the Zizerific Fun Line. And you could find it because it was the last name in the phone book. It had 4 Z's in it. And people would find this because they would just say, you know, I mean, personally, like as somebody who grew up with the telephone, you would flip through it and they would have like trivia numbers, you know, for world history, American history, stuff like that. And I would call it all the time and temperature, all that stuff. So much in the same way, in the 80s, people would flip through the phone book and they would say, what is this Zizerific Fun Line? And call it, and it was Joe leaving recordings on his answering machine as outgoing message, telling fun stories or just things going on in his life. And people found him in that way. And he would leave his phone number at the end of each message. You could call if you wanted. And a lot of people reached out to him and just made friends with him and would call him and talk to him personally. And when we did these interviews with the people who actually called him, you could tell now 30 years later how many of these people he had touched their lives. And they remembered him fondly because of that. And there were even some who like didn't know what happened to him. They were always wondering what happened to him, didn't know that he passed away. And so seeing that definitely made me realize the scope of how much bigger his story was.
Yeah, and it was called the
Zizerific Fun Line.
I mean, it definitely has a good
4
name.
Z's.
It's a catchy fun.
Zizerific.
Yeah, catchy name. That's crazy that his impact like delved that deep with those people. Yeah. Tell me about Joybubbles. What do you think? What do you hope people take away with Ugly Cry?
Yeah. I've talked enough about Joybubbles. Yeah, Ugly Cry. You know, it's a completely different thing. It's more. You know, I'm more of a narrative editor. I dipped my toes in the documentary with Joybubbles and another movie called The Star Sisters. So I work primarily in genre and horror comedies, and Ugly Cry is more akin to that style where it's not necessarily horror, but it's more of a dark comedy. And, you know, I think if anything, it makes you realize just how hard it is specifically, not only to work in the film industry, I think a lot of us here know that, but specifically how hard it is to be an actor or an actress. And there's a lot of attention in the movie that's paid to self-tapes and how grueling it is to have to film yourself and run these lines and get it perfect and then ship it off and never hear anything back. And the mental taxing that takes on, especially actresses, and you know, could affect how they view themselves, and that's exactly what happens to our main character, Delaney.
Yeah, it's interesting that actually, you know, Joybubbles is sort of the outlier here, but in you know, in Ugly Cry, like all of your work kind of deals with the experience of being a woman, of being feminine, you know, of that idea of being judged or looked at, or how did that work into, this is kind of for all of you guys, how did that work into your particular films? Maybe we'll start down here because you guys haven't added in.
Yeah, I mean, it starts, the beginning of the movie starts with like Gloria going down the wormhole of like of his exes and finding Kaylin, and in her mind, Kaylin is like the hottest, but also most basic, like most beautiful, like looking woman on Instagram. And so it's kind of like, I don't want to spoil too much, but it's like when you get into it, like most of it is like, it's kind of like self-perception. Like no one in the beginning of the movie is telling her Kaylin is like this hot person. It's like she's finding it by diving through. And so it's like all of that is from, you know, the social media and everything that we go through in our day-to-days. And so it is like picking and choosing. We're like, well, obviously he would pick that person. Like obviously like Nick would go back to this hot ex and not stay with me. And so I think a lot of it is just like image judgment, which just gets worse and worse with time with social media and with like online dating and stuff, where like the profiles are like you're pitching yourself off of like 4 or 5 photos and you're like, this is me at my hottest. And so it's like a lot of it is like your looks are like quantifiable as to like how good of a person you are, or like how much value you provide. And I think like, especially like, I mean, I'm not a woman. And so like, I don't necessarily know, like, I'm sure it's worse, especially like in like the dealing with like the movie and like the Gloria character. And I know from like Chelsea's perspective, like the short that I was based on, and that it's like loosely based on something from her personal life. So it is a lot of like assumptions being made in your head of like what other people, because of how you look. Yeah.
Veronica?
I mean, it's kind of the same movie. Yeah, no, I mean, it's very much
like the amplification of doubt and how much doubt can kind of sway your perception of who you think you are and how you want to kind of go about things. Because, I mean, without spoiling too much, it's her choices are mainly because of what she's thinking, not necessarily of the actions that are happening around her.
Yeah. There's sort of a there's a lens that's being put through, right? Were there any discussions in how the look of the film or how you were shooting the film, like how did that play into it? Sort of that paranoia, that lens, that multi sort of translation of judgment. Did that play into any of your work on the film?
I would say a little bit, because we didn't want to lean too much into that. It's more of when you're in your self-doubt, you know, it's not amplified that much. It's just kind of a simple, you know, add-on. But I mean, we did incorporate some zooms and just like more smaller nuance types of things. And like, especially for the opening, like we did add like a softer glow, and it's just how we see Kaylin the first time. She is perfect. And it was very much dialing what does perfect mean.
Yeah. Freya?
I think that women in the world have a monopoly on body horror. So I feel like we, the unique experience, well, not unique, but unique and not experience of being in a female body is horrifying in many ways. And I think that's something that we don't always share. You know, it's something that women know about, and I think men often have no idea what that's actually like. And I think Mandy's story is such a sort of a reality of what actual body horror looks like. You know, she was born with legs. It's not like she was born disabled. She went through an experience that was traumatic and she lost her legs. So that to many people is the sort of defining body horror experience. But for her, it's what she decides to do with that, you know, and I think it really fuels that fire inside her to do something with her life. And yeah, I just feel like, I mean, with The Substance, with Ugly Cry, with these films where we're talking about what it's actually like, I think film is a unique medium to take men, especially inside the experience of body horror for women, and for the expectations around how you look and how that means that you present to the world, the ways that it's used to, say whether or not you are a worthy person. Are you intelligent? Are you deserving of work? Are you deserving of respect in the workplace? So I feel like, I mean, these are questions that, as you say, are like common amongst our films, but it feels like they manifest in different ways. But yeah, I feel like what Mandy does, like her resilience is so incredible because she's turning, this sort of quintessential body horror experience into something quite beautiful.
Great. So just closing out this panel, Patrick, what do you hope the takeaway is for Ugly Cry? What do you hope people take away from that film?
I don't know if I could answer that in a different way than I just did, unfortunately. I mean, I just hope that it, you know, raises some awareness about, you know, I think there's been lots of movies that talk about how like social media affects, you know, young women, and this is definitely told from a perspective of how an actress is affected by it. I mean, I think that it's funny actually, because like I mentioned, a big part of the movie centers on self-Botoxing, and then not long after we had locked picture, I was watching television with my wife one night, and a commercial came on for Botox. And I texted Emily Robinson, and I was just like, am I seeing this right? Am I actually seeing a commercial for Botox? And she's like, get out of here. It was like art imitating life, imitating art. It was insane. And so yeah, I think we might actually be living in the world of Ugly Cry, and we just don't fully know it yet. I mean, my guess, it came on like it was Ozempic. And I assumed that was exactly what it was for. It was like, order your own vials of Botox and do it yourself.
I did not know that. I feel like I have my finger on the pulse, but generally, no. Yeah. Wow, that's wild.
That's fun.
Freya, what do you hope people take away from your film?
I think ours is pretty simple. It's just we want you to be inspired by someone who's had the world kind of against her in so many ways, and the way she turned that into something exceptional and beautiful. So I hope you'll be inspired.
Yeah. Drew?
I think at the end of it, it is like we are dealing with like image and stuff like that, but I think at the end of it is like self-respect and kind of like releasing yourself from like the expectations of other people and kind of like reconnecting with yourself. And there is like the movie like ends in a place that I think is a very funny joke, but also a very poignant, I guess, like perspective of the theme of the movie. I'm trying to like really think it's around. But,
You're like, abort.
Oh my God, this is how it ends. But I mean, it is a comedy. It's supposed to be like fun. It's supposed to be like lively. It's very like colorful, and there's a lot of like energy to the movie. But I think it's like trying to like give you like a dose of medicine while having like fun with it, and it like ends on this like really cool hard cut. So if you guys want to see it, like,
Like that cut is so dope.
That's all my idea. Definitely not in the script.
No, it definitely was not.
Veronica, what do you hope people take away from Basic?
I think just enjoy the ride. I think a lot of times people go into a movie really expecting to have their life changed, and this is something where it's so funny and so heartfelt. You know, it might re-question some of your relationships, but it's just a space to just kind of let go. You know, it's something a little lighter to bring to the table.
Oh, great. And Patrick, how about for Joybubbles? What do you hope the takeaway is for Joybubbles?
Well, yeah, I mean, similar. Yeah,
We keep having to come back to you.
I
'cause
could-
you
I
do
could- I could
double the
take this
movies.
too.
still here. Yeah, just you know, like I said, that there are good people in the world, and there's a lot of fascinating stories out there that I mean we just have not even cracked into yet, and his is one of them. There's it's also a lot about understanding the blind community as well, and what they go through, and how he was overlooked in a lot of ways, and like I said, like lived his life alone, and the telephone was his main way of communication.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Drew, Veronica, Freya, and Patrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you to the Behind the Camera House and Impact 24. Good side for putting on this great event.